about the coronavirus. The UN's World Health Organization says believing and acting on misinformation could cause a second wave of infections.
As the northern hemisphere begins to warm up, the myth that warm temperatures kill the virus has returned. And in the southern hemisphere, the myth that cold temperatures kills the virus is making a comeback, but neither is proven. The World Health Organization also says it's hearing the return of other myths like the use of nasal saline washes, ultraviolet light on the skin, eating garlic, using disinfectants on your body, a dangerous myth. The only thing that works is physical distancing right now.
Correspondent Jim Roop, the U.S. Department of Justice warning the mayor of Los Angeles that it might be illegal for him to extend his stay-at-home orders. A letter was sent to him yesterday by the department's Civil Rights Division. I'm Christopher Cruz.
In a time of such uncertainty, one thing you can be absolutely sure of is the Alabama Education Association continuing to fight for the public schools our students, educators, and communities deserve. Whatever your job may be at our public schools and colleges, AEA is proud to have your membership and to provide the advocacy, protection, benefits, and training you need. Please visit myaea.org and stay safe.
The attorneys of Maple, Tucker, and Jacobs are proud to stand with organized labor and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report. It is what their firm is built on, and they recognize how important unions are to the country. Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs are experienced attorneys who can help with your workplace injuries and disability claims. Whether you are a steel worker, coal miner, railroad worker, or machinist, we help all injured workers. Visit www.mtandj.com to find out more. Maple, Tucker, and Jacobs, attorneys for labor, attorneys for you. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services from other law firms.
Hometown Action is pleased to support the launch of the Valley Labor Report because they know that myself and David support their values. They're a power-building collective of small-town, rural, and working-class Alabamians fighting to build inclusive and sustainable communities where all residents can thrive. They invite you to find out more about them online by visiting their website, www.hometownaction.org, and on social media. Please join them in advocating for a stronger labor movement in Alabama impacted by climate change. We can passively accept this fate, or we can join together and take back our power. If we so choose, our best days are ahead. We have a legacy of coming together to face crises that threaten the very ideals of our nation, from the horrors of slavery to the depths of the Great Depression, from the spread of fascism during World War II to the rise of Jim Crow. We have overcome before, and we have the power to do it again. Let's end the climate crisis by igniting a transformational new era where the government works for the common good. Go to arminarmforclimate.org. That's arm in arm, the number 4, climate.org to learn more.
America to hear the truth.
We are going to stand with them, and not only are we going to fight for their rights, but we're going to stand up for our rights here in our state, in our homes, and in our community.
One day longer, one day stronger. One day longer, one day stronger.
Because the future of labor's rights in the United States of America is not going to be decided in the courts. It's not going to be decided in Congress. It's not going to be decided on talk radio, and it sure is not going to be decided on Fox News.
For the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever.
My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, David Story. We are broadcasting live online and on the radio in the Huntsville, Decatur, Athens listening area from Athens, Alabama. Today we'll be talking to representatives of the industrial workers of the world's Freelance Journalists Union. Earlier this month, they were able to secure $150,000 in unpaid invoices for journalists, and they'll be talking to us about how that happened. Later, we're going to be going right at the heart of some anti-union propaganda to show that and explain why collective bargaining and solidarity works. Montgomery hospitals are out of ICU beds because they are taking so many patients from areas where hospitals have closed. This could have been avoided if we had expanded Medicaid in Alabama, but Republicans would sooner their constituents die than admit a Democrat had a half-decent policy idea. While Alabama opens up, a vampire, Vice President at Mazda Toyota salivates at the newly burgeoning labor pool. All this and more on today's Valley Labor Report. Good morning, everybody. So like I said, we have got representatives from the IWW's Freelance Journalists Union with us this morning. Really excited to have them on with us. Liz Waters Hyde is a New York City-based media consultant and a labor organizer for the IWW with a focus on the publishing industry. She is one of the co-founders of the Freelance Journalists Union and IWW's New York City Printing and Publishing Workers Branch. Frank is a longtime freelance journalist. He has pieces in the New York Times, Newsweek, The Guardian, and Jacobin, and forthcoming work in The Industrial Worker. He's a member of the IWW and serves as a delegate for the IWW's Freelance Journalists Union. And Tim is a freelance journalist, a contributor to Outcast, where they were able to secure payment in unpaid invoices, and a member of the IWW's Freelance Journalists Union. So we've got them all on the line, all three of those folks on the line. We're really excited to talk to them. And so right off the bat, before we get to how y'all had your big win, I'd like for you to talk to us a little bit about the Freelance Journalists Union as a structure. By the nature of the job, freelance journalism is competitive. You don't have steady salaries. You don't have a constant employer. You don't have the same employer. And so the incentive structure would seem to be set up to push people in your profession towards competition and away from cooperation. But organizing yourselves into a union is going directly opposite of that, of where the incentive structure would seem to be pushing you. So if you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. The Freelance Journalists Union is a campaign of the Industrial Workers of the World, which is an international labor union that was founded in the U.S. back in 1905. The Industrial Workers of the World has a long-standing history of organizing with the workers that were traditionally left behind by other trade unions. And from its beginning at the turn of the century, this has included women and people of color, immigrant workers, and the unemployed and temporary workers, and those working in low-paying industries. So we felt that this made the IWW a natural fit for organizing freelance workers, which is a section that until recently has been largely ignored by American labor unions. And as our economy becomes more and more reliant on various gig workers and independent contractors, we think that this really is an important subset of workers and that it complements organizing with more traditional workplace campaigns. So, for example, workers that have far more leverage to have their needs met if they can mobilize both staff and freelance writers or photographers, graphic designers, administrative workers, if they can do that simultaneously at one media outlet and effectively stop production and publication when necessary. And this gives the workers more power on the job and in the industry to really make positive changes that make their jobs more sustainable and their quality of life better. So this type of organizing across all job titles and in a particular workplace is an example of industry-focused unionism, which is where the term industrial in the IWW's name comes from. So the Freelance Journalists Union fits into this as like one puzzle piece within the larger printing and publishing section of the IWW. And that allows us to really focus on the specific issues that freelancers face. And we can do that while also building solidarity with other types of workers within the industry as well for broader collective action.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah,
That's really
in terms of the culture around freelance journalism, there is definitely the idea that we function as our own independent businesses, and in that framework, I think it's easy to misconstrue what we're doing as competing with one another. For example, I, as a freelancer, am competing with Tim for the same assignments, and thus we shouldn't actually work together because that would be at one of our detriments. But if we step out of that sort of ideological framework, it's very clear to see that freelancers actually already cooperate very extensively. For example, there's been a bigger movement within the freelance community to share information like, editors' contact information, or how much editors are offering per assignment, or which publications are currently taking assignments, which publications are not. This sort of information sharing illustrates that cooperation is actually beneficial to all freelancers, and that is really the kernel of the solidarity that the Freelance Journalists Union was built upon. The idea that we aren't actually competing for anything. Yes, freelance budgets are limited, but we can either fight for those dollars, or we can work together to try to improve those budgets, try to make them larger, try to improve payment times, try to improve rates. So rather than sort of squabbling over the pennies, we can try to fight for, real dignity in our work if we can, come together.
Right. And I think I totally agree with that. A lot of folks, a lot of, people that are ostensibly conservative, free market type folks, they think that competition is the only good motivating, human drive. But cooperation is just as powerful. And if you ask me, it's more powerful, it's more important, and it's better. But how are you getting freelancers to cooperate and organize together? You're like talking to me about the importance of cooperation, organization, solidarity. Like, it's not a tough sell, right? But for people who have been conditioned to think that they're in competition with you, that they need to withhold as much information as they can for their own personal benefit, what are you saying to them to convince them? How are you getting them to join the union, to join these industrial actions, and go against the incentive structures of the system, because they're very powerful? So what are you saying to them, to folks, to get them to join the union and join you in your industrial actions?
To some degree, we're not really saying anything new. Like I mentioned, a lot of this cooperation is already happening between freelancers because it's to our mutual benefit, and it's developed very naturally over time, especially when you have structures that the internet offers that makes it very easy for freelancers to speak with one another and share information. So to some degree, we're just nurturing that impulse that already exists. So, for example, freelancers already have been sharing, the rates that they receive for articles on Twitter. All we've done is sort of formalize that a little bit. We have a spreadsheet that we share with our members and anyone else in the freelance community that says, like, editor X pays Y and is looking for Z. So to some degree, we're just formalizing some natural impulses that freelancers already have. On another front, I think we're trying to build resources that freelancers have desperately been wanting for a long time, but could not make on an individual basis. So, for example, we provide press passes for freelance journalists, which, are very common in our industry, but are usually restricted to just staff writers. Because they're associated with a publication, they can apply for a press pass with, like, sometimes their local police department or with a larger journalist organization, like a professional organization. This wasn't available to freelancers, so this is something that we created, a resource for them that they were really just telling us that they needed. And then on the third front, I think we're bringing very sort of traditional union activity to freelancers who haven't been able to participate and stuff like that. Organizing freelancers to demand for better working conditions. So, for example, pushing publications to pay freelancers on time, pushing publications to pay overdue invoices to freelancers. So very traditional union activity. So I think if we think about those three different buckets, that's how we're bringing people into the union, from natural impulses to offering them resources to really getting them involved in very traditional union activities.
Okay. So you mentioned that, there's kind of been a long history of natural cooperation and stuff, and y'all are just formalizing this. So can you tell me when y'all were formed officially and you began to start formalizing some of these cooperation processes that had been occurring naturally?
Sure. We started as a campaign of the IWW in the New York City branch in September of 2018. And we initially reached out to our professional networks to find freelance journalists who were interested in that, and kind of spread from there. Then we launched publicly in the beginning of 2019. And by December of 2019, we were able to charter our first IWW branch, the Printing and Publishing Workers branch in New York City. We're currently working on chartering an international printing and publishing workers section within the IWW, since we have members from all over the world now. And we're currently working to expand our campaigns into freelance photographers and foreign correspondents as well.
Okay. And about how many members do y'all have right now?
So at this point, we have nearly 200 dues-paying members, which is great. You know, dues money within the IWW is solely directed towards organizing expenses. None of our organizers are paid. We all do this voluntarily because we believe this is the only way to like build power within the working class and address the issues that confront us. But outside of those sort of 200 dues-paying members, we have maybe 400 or 500 people who are involved in our organizing, and those people like really do a ton of work, even though they're not like dues-paying members. Like they do one-on-one calls with new members. They come up with some of our organizing ideas. They help with resources like the press passes that I mentioned. So I feel like the distinction between dues-paying members and sort of our members is not really the most important metric to us, because freelancing obviously is very precarious. So we don't demand that people pay dues necessarily to get involved in our organization. If freelance journalists want to get involved, they can just reach out to us. We can get them plugged in with everything that we're doing. So yeah, I think that's like allowed us to really accommodate a lot of people without necessarily saying you have to pay dues, because like I said, freelancing is very precarious.
Right. And so we've got about a minute left here before we've got a hard break, and we're going to bring y'all on in the next segment. But really quickly, do you have any way of estimating how many freelancers there are in North America? And do they have any conferences for freelancers or anything like that where y'all go and table or try to organize?
So this is actually a really tough question. There is Bureau of Labor Statistics figures on this, and I think that runs about like 85,000. But in terms of conferences, it's not something we've done, but it is something that we're interested in pursuing in the future.
Okay. All right. We're going to be talking to you about the specific industrial action on the next side of the break. Stay tuned. This is the Valley Labor Report.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
The attorneys of Maple, Tucker, and Jacobs are proud to stand with organized labor and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report. It is what their firm is built on, and they recognize how important unions are to the country. Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs are experienced attorneys who can help with your workplace injuries and disability claims. Whether you are a steel worker, coal miner, railroad worker, or machinist, we help all injured workers. Visit www.mtandj.com to find out more. Maple, Tucker, and Jacobs, attorneys for labor, attorneys for you. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services from other law firms. All workers deserve fair wages, affordable health care, and a retirement plan that enables them to retire with dignity. All workers deserve to have a say about the terms and conditions of their employment, not just the bosses. With the machinist unions over 600,000 members having our back, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama has been serving workers' interests for over 20 years. Our members have the best health insurance in the area with zero deductible plans. We set the bar for pay in the area with over $40 an hour rates, consistently averaging the highest non-college degree jobs in North Alabama with some of the best retirement plans in the industry. We can do the same for you. Together, we remain united, raising our voices to ensure justice on the job and service in the community. The Machinist Union is a true Southern union founded in Atlanta in 1888. We have been serving members' needs for 132 years. The longevity of our union proves our dedication and loyalty to the working class. The Machinist Union isn't just for machinists. We represent workers in government, healthcare, auto workers, aerospace workers, transportation workers, the defense industry, and woodworking. Our members even build the iconic Harley-Davidson motorcycles. If you're ready to get serious about better benefits and wages, if you want to have a voice in your workplace with over 600,000 members to back you up, call or email us today at 256-286-3704 or organize at IAMAW44.org.
Here in Huntsville, federal employees are an invaluable part of the nation's defense, offering unmatched expertise in engineering and technology, and as stewards of taxpayer dollars. What we ask for in return is to be treated with fairness, dignity, and respect. The American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE Local 1858, is a union of working people looking out for each other, making sure that we're treated right. To inquire about joining or to learn more, call 256-876-4880.
WVNN. Depend on it.
Welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host David Story. On the line, we have members and delegates for the IWW's Freelance Journalists Union. We have Bliss Waters Hyde, Frank, and Tim here on the line with us, talking to us about how they were able to secure $150,000 in overdue invoices for freelance journalists. In the last segment, they were talking to us more about the structure of the union. And so now we're on to the good stuff. So like I said, they were able to secure payment of $150,000 in overdue invoices for freelance journalists. So if y'all could tell us how y'all came up with the idea to make that a goal, firstly, and how did you do it, secondly? Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, Tim, would you like to take this one?
Oh, is this me? I thought I was doing a different one. So I think an interesting thing about this is, well, I guess how we came up with the outside, the idea to work on a project targeting outside specifically was they were just kind of known across the freelance industry as a consistent bad actor, and they, really habitually pay months to sometimes even years late.
And just for the audience,
work.
Outside is a publication that freelance journalists would contribute to sometimes.
Yes. And so we basically, we just thought they would be a good place to start with if we were trying to address this issue of late payment in general. So we kind of surveyed a lot of people we knew had contributed and came up. I think something that's interesting is the number that we came up with was actually did not reach 150,000, but once they that's not how much we necessarily thought they owed, although we knew it was probably more than what we had found because we hadn't talked to everyone. So it was interesting to see that once we started pressuring them on this, that they actually kind of immediately said they would pay much more money than we even for sure knew that they owed people. It just shows that the problem was kind of exactly as bad as we thought it was.
Right. And so so that's how you came up with the goal. How did y'all manage to do it? Like, what was your leverage going into these? I don't know that there were any formal negotiations, and you can tell us if they were. But what was your leverage, and how did you actually go about executing this action?
Yeah, so I think I think one interesting thing is that because the world of freelancers does not have a lot of history of union work, I think people are not really used to having to deal with that from freelancers. So we basically, I think the first and probably the most important thing was kind of doing a lot of fact finding and getting a lot of information together from freelancers who had worked for outside in the past. So we could kind of get a broad sense of how big the problem was. And then, once we approached outside, we were in a pretty, we knew we had a lot of information about what they were doing wrong and what our plan of action was. So we approached them initially with this letter saying, "Hey, we know, you're doing this wrong. Everyone knows you're doing this wrong. Can you fix it? And if you don't, things are going to start getting worse for you. So thankfully, they actually kind of immediately, I think a lot of people there knew it was a problem too. So they kind of immediately just agreed to a large part of what of our demands had been. But we had a plan to, I think in the background was we had done our research and had a plan for how to make life more difficult for them if they didn't do the right thing.
Right. Yeah, and that's really important is being able to know what your leverage is in any campaign, any action, any time where you have a goal. It's important to know what your leverage is and how you can use it best. So what can other gig workers or so-called independent contract workers like Uber drivers or musicians learn from your organization and from this industrial action? Like we've got a bunch of local musicians here that have that I've heard have exactly the same problem that y'all had with Outside and with other publications. They have late or non-payment for gigs. And they're not employed by the bar that they play at. So, same with Uber drivers. They're ostensibly not employed by Uber. What can these folks learn from the Freelance Journalists Union?
So we actually really learned a lot from other gig economy workers to begin with. A large part of the inspiration for the Freelance Journalists Union was actually the IWW in the UK, which was organizing Uber Eats drivers. Who are, similarly gig economy employees, probably more precarious than freelance journalists are. So we were able to learn from them because when it comes down to it, the dynamics between the employer and the worker are very similar. Like we don't have any city work. We can't necessarily appeal to the law and our labor rights because we're not considered workers. We're considered independent contractors. But really, the source of power remains the same, where if you can get workers together and identify your common grievances, then you can, like we did with Outside, select a target that you can pressure to meet your demands. I'm not sure exactly what the situation is with musicians in your area, but, if there is one venue that refuses to pay or pay on time, it's about like making sure that who actually has that grievance, getting those people to start talking with one another, and determining ways that you can pressure that that venue to pay up, whether they be legalistic by taking them to court, or more social by putting pressure on them on social media, or old school pickets, stuff like that, or even boycotts.
Right. And so we're wrapping up the interview here. One of y'all mentioned something about a fundraiser that the Freelance Journalists Union is doing in conjunction with the Industrial Worker, which is the IWW's official publication. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and how we can donate to it?
Yeah, the Industrial Worker is actually one of the oldest continuously running labor outlets in the world, but certainly in the United States. It's been printing since, I believe, 1907. As you mentioned, it's the IWW's official publication. So the Freelance Journalists Union is working with Industrial Worker on this fundraiser to basically raise money to pay contributors. Like much of the IWW, the Industrial Worker traditionally ran on volunteer labor, but we're hoping to get folks paid because of the current economic crisis. So if you're able to, you can just Google, GoFundMe, Industrial Worker, and that should bring up the fundraiser.
Okay, thank you. This is the Valley Labor Report. We've had the IWW's Freelance Journalists Union on to talk to us. Stay tuned. We've got more after the break.
Huntsville's #1 news, talk, and weather station. WVNN Athens. WVNN FM Trinity. A Cumulus station. It's 10 o'clock.
Special report, coronavirus update. I'm Christopher Cruz. Let houses of worship open this weekend or face the consequences. A threat from President Trump, who says churches, mosques, and synagogues are essential, and said if governors didn't let them open, he would override their orders. White House correspondent Caitlin Collins says the White House coronavirus response coordinator, Dr. Deborah Birx, is urging caution, however.
She said if they're in certain areas where they have a higher outbreak of COVID cases, she said maybe they wait a little bit longer before they reopen. But the president said he wanted to see them opened as soon as this weekend. And of course, the fact that he made this proclamation on a Friday gives these churches very little chance to get ready for Sunday. So we'll be waiting to see what it is and how this plays out across the nation.
The U.S. Department of Justice has warned the mayor of Los Angeles that it might be illegal for him to extend his stay-at-home orders. In a letter, it said recent comments by Mayor Eric Garcetti suggest a prolonged shutdown may be arbitrary. I'm Christopher Cruz. A huge early morning fire on San Francisco's Pier 45 on Fisherman's Wharf. No injuries reported, and fire department spokesman Jonathan Baxter says a World War II Liberty ship docked nearby is safe.
If we're looking for one positive to come out of this tragic event, saving a historic World War II vessel at the beginning of Memorial Day weekend is something we should all be proud of as a community.
125 firefighters are on the scene at this hour. Hertz has filed for bankruptcy. Correspondent Allison Cusick says the effective end of travel in the U.S. is one of the reasons.
Most of its revenue, 2/3 of it, comes from those airport locations. But with fewer people flying and fewer people needing rental cars, that huge chunk of revenue is gone.
In its bankruptcy filing yesterday, Hertz said it has $1 billion in cash on hand and $24 billion in debt. I'm Christopher Cruz.
Are you paying too much for term life insurance? There's a tremendous price war among the major term life companies. Rates have dropped dramatically in the past few years. For example, a man age 45 non-tobacco user, $1 million of coverage, $75 per month level rate for the next 10 years. Or a man age 50 non-tobacco can obtain $500,000 of coverage for a monthly premium of only $110 per month, guaranteed not to change for the next 20 years. That's right, level rate guaranteed not to change for the next 20 years. If you're a smoker, we have great rates available for you as well. At Termbusters, we specialize in policies of $500,000 and above. If you're looking for new or replacement term life insurance, call today for a quote at 1-800-569-5440. That's 1-800-569-5440. You're probably paying more than you should. Call Termbusters, 1-800-569-5440, or visit our website at termbusters.net. Remember, 1-800-569-5440. Rates and availability may vary by state. Sample rate quotes based on preferred non-tobacco underwriting. Exam required to qualify.
Ours are the first generations to feel the effects of climate change and the last to be able to do anything about it. The window to meet this historic challenge is closing. We're already losing our lives and livelihoods. Millions have already been impacted by climate change. We can passively accept this fate, or we can join together and take back our power. If we so choose, our best days are ahead. We have a legacy of coming together to face crises that threaten the very ideals of our nation, from the horrors of slavery to the depths of the Great Depression, from the spread of fascism during World War II to the rise of Jim Crow. We have overcome before, and we have the power to do it again. Let's end the climate crisis by igniting a transformational new era where the government works for the common good. Go to arminarmforclimate.org. That's arm in arm, the number 4, climate.org to learn more.
All workers deserve fair wages, affordable health care, and a retirement plan that enables them to retire with dignity. All workers deserve to have a say about the terms and conditions of their employment, not just the bosses. With the machinist unions over 600,000 members having our back, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama has been serving workers' interests for over 20 years. Our members have the best health insurance in the area with zero deductible plans. We set the bar for pay in the area with over $40 an hour rates, consistently averaging the highest non-college degree jobs in North Alabama with some of the best retirement plans in the industry. We can do the same for you. Together, we remain united, raising our voices to ensure justice on the job and service in the community. The Machinist Union is a true Southern union founded in Atlanta in 1888. We have been serving members' needs for 132 years. The longevity of our union proves our dedication and loyalty to the working class. The Machinist Union isn't just for machinists. We represent workers in government, healthcare, auto workers, aerospace workers, transportation workers, the defense industry, and woodworking. Our members even build the iconic Harley-Davidson motorcycles. If you're ready to get serious about better benefits and wages, if you want to have a voice in your workplace with over 600,000 members to back you up, call or email us today at 256-286-3704 or organize at IAMAW44.org.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
The time has come for America to hear the truth.
We are going to stand with them, and not only are we going to fight for their rights, but we're going to stand up for our rights here in our state, in our homes, and in our community.
One day longer, one day stronger. One day longer, one day stronger.
Because the future of labor's rights in the United States of America is not going to be decided in the courts. It's not going to be decided in Congress. It's not going to be decided on talk radio, and it sure is not going to be decided on Fox News.
For the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever.
Good morning and welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host David Story. David and I both believe very strongly that unions are good for workers. We've come to believe this through years of research, experience, and practice. The goal of the show is to communicate this truth with a wider audience. And in pursuit of that goal, it's sometimes necessary to back up and talk about fundamentals. I know what it's like to grow up in rural Alabama and not even know what a union is. I don't believe that I have any family that's a member of a union. There's not a history in my heritage of unions. And if you had asked me when I graduated high school what a union was, what they do, I wouldn't have really had an answer for you.
Most people in Alabama don't. Most people in Alabama have no clue what a union is or what they do.
That's exactly right. I could have talked a little bit about what I learned in my history books, but just by and large, I really didn't know. And so a lot of folks are in that situation. They don't even know what a union is, much less how it functions or how it can be helpful to them at their workplace. And so we've been talking for some time, before we got on the air actually, about kind of the fundamentals. And we've created a couple of YouTube videos about what a union is. You can look up our YouTube channel, The Valley Labor Report, on YouTube, and you can find those. We talked about what it is structurally, what a union is. We talked about day-to-day operations of a union. We talked about some labor history. And like I said, if you want to go check those out, they're still on YouTube. And I think there's some really good information in there. But today, we wanted to talk about the real material benefits that unions bring to their members, to their community, and even, believe it or not, their companies, although that, in my opinion, is secondary. And then we're going to explain why that is. So firstly, and this one is the most obvious. It's the one that gets bandied about the most when you talk to union advocates. There's a wage premium that unions bring to workers. Among full-time salary and wage earners, union workers make about 23% more than their non-union counterparts. That's from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And that's 23%, that's a lot of money. Now, of course, as with anything, there's going to be differing views on this. There's going to be arguments to be had. And one of the anti-union wage premium arguments is that this aggregate data is not rigorous enough. There are likely confounding variables distorting the data that, say unions are concentrated in areas with higher costs of living. And so, of course, the union wages are going to be higher because there are more union members, say, in New York or California, where the cost of living is much more than, say, in Alabama. And so if you compare those wages, it doesn't really make sense. And that's a good argument, right? It doesn't make sense to compare what a union person makes in New York to a non-union person makes in Alabama. And so there have been plenty of studies that take into account those variables. They take into account education, experience, geography, which I think is one of the most important things. And in all of these studies, in almost every industry, you still get a union wage premium, just a little bit smaller one, something like 10 to 20%. And, the fact that like anti-union advocates throw this around and say, oh, it's just a smaller wage premium, like a 10% raise.
10% is pretty good.
10% is darn good. I don't know. How many times in your career do you get a 10% raise?
Well, and you got to couple that with the fact that, most non-union workers and most non-union companies don't want to address it, but the fact is union wages, even in the area, increase the wages of everybody around, because in the market, then all of a sudden the companies are competing for that same labor group. So they're going to have to raise their wages to compete. And one of the things that coincidentally, when we were in negotiations with my union, not this past contract, but the contract before, even the chief negotiator there said that in the business community, that the other CEOs and plant managers in the area had came to her and said, your employees are making way too much money. We're having a difficult time competing with that same labor group. And so she brought that to the table and said, look, y'all are asking for too much. But the fact of the matter is we're worth it. And that's one of the things that everybody has to get in their mindset is, if you're making money for the company, then you are worth what you're making.
That's exactly right. And that's another thing. Unions increase non-union wages. And that makes intuitive sense, obviously. Like David was talking about, if unions increase wages for their members, and they do, then they create employer-side competition. And this is something that anti-union folks love, as long as it's the workers that are competing to bring home enough money to live on. But they don't like it so much when it's the employer having to compete by raising wages. The non-union workers most benefited by strong union presence are men with no more than a high school degree. For those workers, the decline in union density since 1979 has meant a $3,200 decrease in annual wages. Lots of folks talk about wage stagnation since the 70s and the 80s. And that is, like I was talking about before, that's aggregate data. When you actually look at different groups of folks, when you look at non-union men that have no more than a high school degree, their wages have gone down. They would have gone up if we had kept the union density that we had. And how can we know this? We know that because even when the labor movement was at its strongest, there have always been pockets of the U.S. or certain industries that have been resistant to unionization efforts, and we can compare real non-union wages in union-dense areas to real non-union wages in areas with sparse representation and see what changes are made when there's a really strong union density in the non-union labor market. And that's something that, that's something that's not talked about enough, is that unions are good for all workers. We increase the wages, we increase the working conditions, we make better the working conditions, we make better the benefits for everybody in the same labor market as us.
Yeah.
Healthcare. 95% of civilian union workers have employer-sponsored health care. 68% of non-union workers have access to employer-sponsored health care. Yeah. That was in 2019.
Not just employer-sponsored health care, too, I'd like to point out, but better. employer-sponsored health care. You know, whenever I talk to people out on the streets and tell them about my health care and the fact that all I do whenever I go to the doctor is make a copay, or when we have to go to the hospital. My wife had some issues a few months ago, and I paid $150, and that was it. There's no deductibles in my health insurance. So you know, while everybody else is out there trying to figure out, can I get these surgeries in by the end of the year, we don't have to worry about that.
Right.
It's 100% better
for every different healthcare benefit. Whether you talk about short-term disability, whether you talk about this or that, union workers have it more often, they pay less, and they get more services in return. Retirement. 90% of union workers have retirement plans with their employers compared to 77% of non-union workers. Safety is a very important one.
Safety is very important, yep.
Unionization is associated with a 13 to 30% drop in traumatic injuries and a 28 to 83% drop in fatalities. Unions are the embodiment of solidarity, cooperation, and brotherhood of working people, and they care more about their safety than businesses do. Laws and regulations are reactive, unions are proactive. This is the Valley Labor Report. We'll talk more after the break.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
The attorneys of Maple, Tucker, and Jacobs are proud to stand with organized labor and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report. It is what their firm is built on, and they recognize how important unions are to the country. Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs are experienced attorneys who can help with your workplace injuries and disability claims. Whether you are a steel worker, coal miner, railroad worker, or machinist, we help all injured workers. Visit www.mtandj.com to find out more. Maple, Tucker, and Jacobs, attorneys for labor, attorneys for you. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services from other law firms.
Public schools are critical to the success of communities and democracy. Now more than ever, our educators and school support staff are going above and beyond to support our students and families. We at the Alabama Education Association are proud to represent the hardworking employees of our public schools and colleges. Thank you for all of your love and dedication to Alabama's students. Please take care and stay safe.
Ours are the first generations to feel the effects of climate change and the last to be able to do anything about it. The window to meet this historic challenge is closing. We're already losing our lives and livelihoods. Millions have already been impacted by climate change. We can passively accept this fate, or we can join together and take back our power. If we so choose, our best days are ahead. We have a legacy of coming together to face crises that threaten the very ideals of our nation. From the horrors of slavery to the depths of the Great Depression, from the spread of fascism during World War II to the rise of Jim Crow, we have overcome before, and we have the power to do it again. Let's end the climate crisis by igniting a transformational new era where the government works for the common good. Go to arminarmforclimate.org. That's arm in arm, the number 4, climate.org to learn more. The Valley Labor Report is also supported by listeners like you. If you value the work that we are doing, injecting a different perspective into talk radio, and you have the means, consider signing up for a monthly donation on patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. Again, that's patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report to support our work and keep us on the air.
News Talk 770 AM, 92.5 FM, WVNN.
Just like the father of my father, time stole his mind, and I can't forget that 1/4 of his blood is mine. I try not to worry.
Welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host David Story. We were talking about the benefits of unionization that unions bring to workers, that unions bring to their communities. And when we left off, we were talking about safety. We talked about how there's nearly a 30% drop in traumatic injuries that are associated with union workers, and a 30 to 80% drop in fatalities at union workplaces.
Let's talk about that for a second,
Yeah.
because a lot of times we bring up these numbers and like hourly wage increases and how they're better than non-union areas, and everybody knows why, because we go in and negotiate collectively as a group, so we get more as a group than somebody going in and trying to ask for a raise on their own. But a lot of people don't understand the reasoning behind why the safety aspect is more important, and the workplace is safer in a union area. And that's because in a union, generally you set up in your contract with a company a safety committee that is made up of the workers. And we have a group of 3 workers at our plant. They're members of the safety committee, and they sit down with the company every month and meet and go over what were the accidents that happened this past month. How can we fix these? How can we alleviate these, whether it be through, maybe it was an employee that made a mistake, or maybe the equipment was failing. But they're out on the floor every day talking to people and trying to figure out how we can make the workplace a safer environment for everybody. And that's why you see that greater increase in safety awareness and safe workplaces in unions as opposed to non-union places.
Right. And, like technocratic liberal types, they may think, there's some like liberal types that are like, oh, well, we don't need unions anymore. We've evolved past the need for unions or whatever. And they think that maybe laws and regulations can substitute for that. But there is no substitute, because the laws and regulations or whatever that government tries to do, there's just simply like the government is not gonna have the budget to put, like you said, 3 workers at every single workplace to oversee the safety and even if they did, those workers are not there. They don't have the same relationship to the employer and to the coworkers there that a union safety committee does. And the studies bear this out. Like laws and regulations, they just simply don't work as well as unions
all
do.
the conservatives that are out there that want to talk about free market and reduce an overbearing government or the regulations that government put in place, well, this is your alternative to that free market. Right. In the free market is, let's get rid of some of this government oversight and let's let the workers handle it, because who knows better how to make their workplace safe than the workers.
Right. Legislation and regulation is reactive. Like that comes in most often. Sometimes there's some proactive legislation or regulation, but it's not common. Usually what happens is they set up a penalty if something bad happens. What unions do, what those safety committees do, they are proactive. They constantly patrol the work site and make sure that workers are safe and talk to the workers about what they need. It's not reactive, it's proactive, and that's the difference.
Yep. And we, one thing that we do in our places, and I'm sure y'all do it out there as well, is the fact that, if a worker feels unsafe on the job, they ring up one of the stewards and bring the steward over and say, hey, I don't think this is right. Maybe the equipment's faulty. You never do know. But, they say, hey, I'm not too sure about this. And we've got it in our contract where it says, look, if a worker feels safe, we're going to stop right then. We're going to call folks over and let's get this handled. And we don't go back to work until everybody feels safe.
Right. And one of the reasons that, not even just that there's a safety committee, but like when you have a union contract, you can't be fired unless you have or there are provisions in there that say that after a certain time you have a probationary period in a lot of contracts, but they say that you can't be fired unless you have just cause. So in union workplaces, workers have much more freedom, and they feel that freedom to say something like you were talking about, like, hey, talk to my steward. I don't really feel comfortable with this. Can you check this out for me? Or where in a non-union workplace, they may be afraid, and rightfully so, that if they say something, they'll be fired or they'll be retaliated against or they'll have their pay docked for noting a safety concern. And that's common. That's common. And they have reason to be afraid. Where in a union workplace, they are much more free, and they can, workers can tackle problems that managers, that supervisors, that CEOs and bosses, they just don't see because they're not on the floor doing the job.
Yeah. And one of the things that, to take into consideration is we talk about these contracts a lot. And these contracts, it probably bears to clarify that these contracts, a lot of times when you talk to people that's never been in a union, they think, the international or the union, the big union bosses is going to come in and tell you what to do. Look, these contracts are negotiated with the people in your plant. I'm on the negotiating committee in our plant. We sit down with the company and negotiate these months in advance, and it's voted on by the people in your plant. It's a very democratic way of handling things. If we don't get 50%, then we go back to the table and try to work on something different. But the point is, there's no big union bosses that's coming in to tell you what to do whenever you're in a union. The union is all the workers, and those contracts take that gray area, that unknown out of what your daily work is. You know what your work schedule is. You know what your shift is. You know it's not going to change. The manager ain't going to be able to come in and tell you tomorrow, hey, you got to go to third shift. I don't care what your family situation is. Mm-hmm. If you don't go, you're terminated. Right. Those contracts take away all those unknowns and clarify everything for everybody.
Right. Now, I think that if I remember correctly, you've never had a non-union job, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, David probably can't even imagine this, but I've worked in a lot of non-union workplaces, and, talking, if I were to go back there or back in time and say, Jake, and in your future contract, in your future employment contracts, you're going to be able to help write them or something, or tell my coworkers or tell people that I used to work with, tell them today that if you organize and you get your coworkers together in your workplace, you can write the contract that you're employed under. You can help write that with your boss. That's just not something that people who don't work in a union workplace, that's just not something that they're familiar with. And that's not something that it just doesn't happen.
Yeah. Who wants to go year to year wondering if you're going to get a raise?
Right.
That's one of the big benefits is, hey, we got a 4-year contract. We know we're going to get 3%, 3% every year.
Or, if you're talking about service workers, those folks, they go week to week not knowing when they're going to work.
Yeah.
Or not knowing how much they're going to work. Yeah. I remember working at a restaurant one week just because the boss on a whim decided to hire 3 more servers. I went from working 60 hours a week to working 25 hours a week. I didn't have any say over that. There wasn't anything I could do. The boss hired 3 more servers to punish somebody for not coming in on time. And so all of us got our hours cut in half. And I was at home. I was living at home, right? I didn't have bills or I didn't have rent to pay or anything. So it wasn't that big a deal for me at the time. But there were people that I worked with that had children. They had rent. They had gas to pay. They had car insurance. They had to put food in their children's mouths. Yeah. And, and their hours were just cut in half.
Yeah.
At the whim of the boss.
Yep. It's sickening, really. And that's one of the things, that's one of the great things about being a union member is it takes away all that gray area. You know exactly what your roles and responsibilities are, and you know exactly what the company's roles and responsibilities are.
Right. And you talked about this a little bit, but the reason that that's able to happen is unions, they bring better wages, they bring better retirement packages, they bring better health care, they increase non-union wages. And so the question is, why does that happen? Are unions magic? And no, unions aren't magic. The reason is that the collective bargaining process, whether it's formal or informal, it brings more leverage to everybody, because no matter how talented you are as an individual, you are not worth the whole workforce. The sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, right? So when you all bargain together collectively, you bring all your skills, all your talents, all your experience, everything to the table, and you get more for it. Like that's the simple fact. No matter how you calculate it, you're just not worth the whole workforce, and you cannot bring the leverage of the whole workforce into individual contract negotiations. Like, it just doesn't work that way. That's the reason that collective bargaining is so important. So we're going to take another break. If you'd like to weigh in on the other side, call 1-866-494-WVNN. Again, that's 1-866-494-9866. This is the Valley Labor Report.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story. This is News Talk 770 AM, 92.5 FM WVNN. News starts now.
Special report, coronavirus update. I'm Christopher Cruz. Beaches from coast to coast and border to border are reopening on this Memorial Day weekend, the traditional start to the summer season. But there are some restrictions in place, says correspondent Natasha Chen in Tybee Island, Georgia this morning.
Parties are supposed to stay at least 6 feet apart. We are seeing that happen, and there's supposed to be groups of 10 or fewer people. And the Department of Natural Resources from the state is patrolling to make sure that people are actually keeping their social distance.
In neighboring Alabama, where hospitalizations and the overall number of infections have risen since April, state health officials say they're worried as the state opens its casinos and churches and other businesses. Parking lots are filling up, and in many places it's rare to see people wearing face masks. New coronavirus cases have dropped to 0 in China for the first time since the pandemic began. I'm Christopher Cruz.
The attorneys of Maple, Tucker, and Jacobs are proud to stand with organized labor and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report. It is what their firm is built on, and they recognize how important unions are to the country. Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs are experienced attorneys who can help with your workplace injuries and disability claims. Whether you are a steel worker, coal miner, railroad worker, or machinist, we help all injured workers. Visit www.mtandj.com to find out more. Maple, Tucker, and Jacobs, attorneys for labor, attorneys for you. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services from other law firms. Hometown Action is concerned Alabama's small towns and rural communities increasingly are coming under attack by corporate interests that run local shops out of businesses, shutter our rural hospitals, and pollute our rivers, providing only unstable poverty wage jobs with no health insurance. We know workers and local residents understand the best solution to local problems. Together, we can build the multiracial, working-class power we need to take back our communities. Please join us online at www.hometownaction.org. Thanks for standing with workers, supporting Valley Labor Talk.
Public schools are critical to the success of communities and democracy. Now more than ever, our educators and school support staff are going above and beyond to support our students and families. We at the Alabama Education Association are proud to represent the hardworking employees of our public schools and colleges. Thank you for all of your love and dedication to Alabama's students. Please take care and stay safe.
The Valley Labor Report is also supported by listeners like you. If you value the work that we are doing, injecting a different perspective into talk radio, and you have the means, consider signing up for a monthly donation on patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. Again, that's patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report to support our work and keep us on the air.
The attorneys of Maple, Tucker, and Jacobs are proud to stand with organized labor and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report. It is what their firm is built on, and they recognize how important unions are to the country. Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs are experienced attorneys who can help with your workplace injuries and disability claims. Whether you are a steel worker, coal miner, railroad worker, or machinist, we help all injured workers. Visit www.mtandj.com to find out more. Maple, Tucker, and Jacobs, attorneys for labor, attorneys for you. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services from other law firms.
The Dale Jackson Show, a safe space for terrible people. Weekdays, 7 to 11 a.m., only on WVNN. WVNN.
Welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host David Story. Again, the number to call if you'd like to weigh in, talk to us about unions, ask us some questions. The number is 1-866-494-WVNN, 1-866-494-9866. So we're going to move on to some news, some Alabama news. Montgomery hospitals last week announced that they are running out of ICU beds. And, you know, that's just another illustration of how the push to reopen is not about safe public policy. It's about exploiting workers and benefiting the rich. And I do just want to preface this with saying that, you know, I'm not against reopening some sectors of the economy or allowing some people to move back into the office. I think that there are definitely reasons to do that, but there are ways to do that where you protect people who are at risk, and we're not doing that. Like if like we mentioned last week, I think it was, if you get called back for work, no matter what your situation is, if you do not go back, you lose your unemployment benefits. You lose your livelihood. So what if you're a 75-year-old person working at McDonald's who is living on Social Security and they don't have enough money to, that's not enough money to live on, and they have to work at McDonald's to make ends meet. What if you get called back, but you can't, but you don't feel safe? You know, you're 75 years old, you're a cancer survivor, you have COPD or asthma or whatever else these comorbidities are that make COVID-19 a threat. Well, you know, you're just out of luck. You're just out of luck. You got to go back to work. You got to serve these people at McDonald's, and you know, like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
And I think that's something that that everybody needs to take into consideration, is the fact that I recognize there's a lot of people that want to get back to work, and I know there's a lot of employers that want to get back to work, but there's a lot of employees that are still scared to death, and there's a lot of employees and employers that are not taking those considerations, taking those safety things into consideration. And, you know, my daughter was just asking last week about going to a restaurant. I'm like, look, we're not going to go to a restaurant right now because I still don't trust that the manager in that restaurant, I know how they operate. You of all people know how they operate. And I don't trust that they are taking the workers' safety into consideration, and I certainly don't trust that they're taking their patrons' safety into consideration. So, you know, and the workers are, if they're being forced back to work, then we both know that people are living paycheck to paycheck. Whether they're sick or not, there's a good chance they're going to go into work. And God knows who
they don't have any choice but to.
Exactly. And I don't want to be the one on the receiving end of the worker being forced in and sick and not knowing whether they have the COVID or not.
Yeah, you know, that's exactly right. And they're passing Kay Ivey passed an executive order that says that, you know, if you're a business, you're going to be protected from liability or whatever. And, you know, that just goes to show, like, this is not about keeping people safe. It's about exploiting workers and benefiting the rich. And you can look at that. You can look at the people that are behind the push, the groups that are pushing this. Save Our Country Coalition, the American Legislative Exchange Council, the State Policy Network. These are all billionaire funded. They're billionaire funded right-wing groups. And you can see it in the solutions that they advocate. The solutions include laying off a quarter of the state's non-essential, quote-unquote, public employees, shuttering local libraries, hiking state employees' health care premiums, raising in-state tuition at public universities. I mean, you know, this is just, it's a billionaire fever dream. It's not about safe public policy. It's not about that. It's about exploiting workers. It's about benefiting the rich. It's about making sure that these oligarch donors have more money in their pockets. You know, another thing to talk about, there have been 17 hospitals that have been shut down in the last 10 years. That didn't have to happen. If we had expanded Medicaid, these hospitals wouldn't have closed. We can see that in states that expanded Medicaid, we didn't have all these hospitals that closed in these other states. David, you're telling me we've got a caller on the line?
We do.
I can't hear you.
My apologies. We do. One of our sponsors is on the line, actually, wanting to talk about some workers' rights.
Okay, fantastic.
Well, good morning, guys. This is Jack. This is Jack Jacobs. How you doing?
Oh, Jack Jacobs? I can't hear
you. Still there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, this is Jack Jacobs, right?
That's right.
Yes. So Jack Jacobs is an attorney at Maple, Tucker and Jacobs LLC, workers' rights law firm. And so what did you want to talk to us about?
Well, just hearing y'all talk about the importance of union safety, just really, especially in this time of COVID, is just kind of, I've seen it firsthand how important unions are in this fight. Here in the Birmingham area, mine workers have been very vocal in making sure their guys are protected and socially distanced while they work. And I don't think that would have happened if the union had been there fighting for it from the start.
Yeah, if there's one thing that the mine workers know about, it's respiratory illnesses and respiratory diseases over the past 100 years that they've been struggling to bring in workplace safety.
That's very true. I mean, these guys are, at risk anyway with black lung, but then to have the added threat of getting a COVID disease is just, add so much to that.
Right. And that's exactly right. If these places that are trying to call employees back, if they had unions there, the unions could be there to negotiate the terms of the re-return. Yeah, of the return to work. It wouldn't just be that the employer, I'm Mr. Bossman and I've got all the power and I'm going to tell you the terms that you have to return to work. Otherwise, not only will you not get a paycheck from me, you won't get unemployment from the state. I will call the Department of Labor to make sure that you're not getting it. That's what our Department of Labor in Alabama has instructed employers to do. If everybody had unions, everybody would be able to negotiate the terms of their return to work. And they like David was talking about, we would have committeemen at these workplaces, making sure that people are properly social distancing, making sure that workplaces have proper PPE, making sure that, all of these things are in place, and the return to work would not be nearly as scary for so many people, and it wouldn't be necessary for some people. We could make sure that some people stay off the work site for longer that need to be off the work site for longer. Like I was talking about, those people that have those comorbidities that make the coronavirus a real threat. It's a threat to everybody, but there are people that are more at risk than others.
Yep. And what are you seeing?
I think that's right. And so,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
With the mine workers, they've basically got 65 people normally going down an elevator shaft to start the shift at a time. And they've negotiated where they're going to start staggering shifts and go 60 at a time. They can socially distance and not have to worry about being too close to the coworkers. Yeah. And that's, obviously a lot of burden on the company having to stagger this all out. But, because the union's there to speak out, they're getting these things done. And I'm really proud of what they've done for those guys.
Yeah, that's everything that we're seeing. The same way in my workplace is completely focused on workplace safety. Jacob mentioned the Department of Labor a moment ago, and I'm sure you being a lawyer work hand in hand with them a lot. And it's worth mentioning that, the Department of Labor and a lot of other states actually look out for the employees in those states. And because of the administration that we've elected in this state, we don't see the Department of Labor working with employees almost at all. They're ostensibly a whipping stick for the employers. And, a lot of people think elections don't have consequences, but that's one of the things that we see consistently across the board is, these appointed positions that are supposed to be working for workers, and they're effectively just forcing workers to do what the employers want.
Yeah, that's my experience as well. My involvement with the labor department for the state has been, it's more about labor management than it is protecting workers. And it's just very frustrating.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, it's really frustrating when, ostensibly the state is supposed to be, a representation of the people. It's supposed to be functioning on the people's interests, for the people's interests. And it's true, and this is the state of affairs that we live in. But it's sad to see the state functioning as, the big stick for the boss, for the corporations, for the wealthy elite.
We got about 2 more minutes. Is there anything you want to mention about the mine workers or anything like that y'all are currently doing before we wrap up this segment?
We do a lot of work with those guys when they get black lung and hurt in the mines. That's, a lot of what we do. And so we do get concerned with, making sure these guys aren't getting, COVID disease. And this is affecting a lot of, retirees as well. And that's one thing that we're concerned about is we've had a few retired miners die from COVID disease or get sick from it. So it's something to worry about. It's serious, and we need to take precautions. So,
yeah. But
thank y'all for what y'all are doing and getting this message out. So we appreciate that so much.
Yeah, well, we sincerely appreciate your support. And real quick, if there's other workers that may not be union represented out there that have some issues, with something like that, with black lung or something, is there a number that do y'all work with those folks at all? And if so, is there a number that they can reach you at?
Sure. They can call our office at 205-322-2333. And we work with any workers we don't discriminate as far as that goes, but I'm glad to help anyone who's been injured on the job. That's not a problem.
Yeah. We're constantly talking about the same thing. Even though we're extremely vocal and union activists, it's a constant struggle. We work with people on a daily basis in non-union areas to try to help them out, to show them how to file board charges with the National Labor Relations Board and things like that. So, that's good work on everybody's part. Hey,
absolutely.
We certainly appreciate you calling in.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
good luck.
Have a good Saturday.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. Yeah, so that was, again, that was Jack Jacobs. He's an attorney at Maple, Tucker, and Jacobs, LLC. He's an attorney for workers. If you've got any problems, reach out to him, mtnj.com. And so we are going to be taking another break right about now. If you want to call us on the other side, again, the number is 1-866-494-WVNN, 1-866-494-9866. This is the Valley Labor Report with Jacob Morrison and David Story.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
The attorneys of Maple, Tucker, and Jacobs are proud to stand with organized labor and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report. It is what their firm is built on, and they recognize how important unions are to the country. Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs are experienced attorneys who can help with your workplace injuries and disability claims. Whether you are a steel worker, coal miner, railroad worker, or machinist, we help all injured workers. Visit www.mtnj.com to find out more. Maple, Tucker, and Jacobs, attorneys for labor, attorneys for you. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services from other law firms.
The Valley Labor Report is also supported by listeners like you. If you value the work that we are doing, injecting a different perspective into talk radio, and you have the means, consider signing up for a monthly donation on patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. Again, that's patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report to support our work and keep us on the air. Hometown Action is pleased to support the launch of the Valley Labor Report because they know that myself and David support their values. They're a power-building collective of small-town, rural, and working-class Alabamians fighting to build inclusive and sustainable communities where all residents can thrive. They invite you to find out more about them online by visiting their website, www.hometownaction.org, and on social media. Please join them in advocating for a stronger labor movement in Alabama. The American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE Local 1858, believes all workers are entitled to fairness, dignity, and respect. AFGE also knows that the best way to guarantee proper treatment is for workers to stand together, united, looking out for each other. In AFGE, we fight for workers every day to ensure a workplace that is safe and free from harassment. If you're a federal employee and want to be a part of this union to protect yourself and your fellow workers, call 256-876-4880.
The attorneys of Maple, Tucker, and Jacobs are proud to stand with organized labor and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report. It is what their firm is built on, and they recognize how important unions are to the country. Maple, Tucker, and Jacobs are experienced attorneys who can help with your workplace injuries and disability claims. Whether you are a steel worker, coal miner, railroad worker, or machinist, we help all injured workers. Visit www.mtnj.com to find out more. Maple, Tucker, and Jacobs, attorneys for labor, attorneys for you. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services from other law firms.
Welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host David Story. We had a little bit of an echo during the ad break, but it doesn't sound like we've got one right now. It sounds like everything's good. So the last story that we wanted to talk about here is, and I talked about this in the opening, is that it is just an absolute vampire. A vice president at Mazda Toyota was quoted in AL.com just salivating at the newly burgeoning surplus labor pool in Alabama. Don't let yourself be taken advantage of. He was talking about how, this would be a win-win and how they were going to have to bring in people from out of state, and now they're going to be able to hire people in state. And don't fall for any. It's a win-win for them.
Yeah, there's no win on the employees' part whenever the labor market is so saturated with people out of work, and effectively what they're going to do is reduce their higher-end rates for those employees. It happens consistently. Anytime there's high unemployment, you're going to see salaries across the board coming down. One more reason why you should be negotiating collectively, because those higher end rates are set, they're guaranteed. But what do you expect? Japanese companies have consistently been anti-union throughout their history, throughout their history in general, but especially as the ones that came into Alabama. That's one of the reasons why they come to Alabama so much.
Exactly. That is one of the reasons that they come to not just Japanese companies, but these European companies that in Europe or in Germany, they have these, they put on these airs of progressivism and I care about the workers, but that's all just a bunch of nonsense. None of these big multinational corporations care about the workers. That's why they come to places like Alabama where union density is so low. That's why they go to places like
Mississippi,
Mississippi,
look at Mississippi.
or out of country in South and Central America where they can pay workers pennies. It's because they want to extract the most money from human beings as possible. They just want to wring all of the value out of your body that they can. They don't care about you. They don't care about you, and that's why organizing is so important. And
at the end of the day, the employees are looked at as resources. And if you talk to anybody in human resources, there's a reason why they're called human resources in your plant. A lot of them have moved in the past few years to what they like to term labor relations, but they look at us as resources, the same as gas, the same as oil, the same as anything that they can extract, because that's what it's all about, is extracting the maximum value from your workers that you can.
And that's why, people say that it's, the class struggle language is really radical and it's not necessary or whatever. And it's just true that the working class and the employing class have fundamentally contradicting motivations and incentives. Like, as a worker, you want to do the least amount of work for the most amount of money. As an employer, you want the most amount of work for the least amount of money. And so those contradict. And it's not even necessarily a value judgment on the employer, although, of course, when it gets to a certain point, it of course is, when you're paying pennies on the dollar, or when you have terribly unsafe conditions, it's a value judgment. But
I think it is a value judgment, though.
Yeah.
Call it for what it is, Jacob. It is a value judgment whenever you've got people that can't buy a car, that can't afford a home, that can't afford health care, that children are having to use SNAP, or they're having to use the subsidized lunches at school. That is a value judgment on their part. And they want to overlook that. They want us to overlook it, and they want, and these folks are buying yachts down in Mobile and putting them on the bay and flying out to Paris and what have you every year for vacation, while their employees are absolutely struggling.
Right. And while I was working at the restaurant, we paid people in the back of the house $8 an hour, while the person that owned the restaurant had 2 houses and a jet ski. And he didn't do any of the work in the restaurant. And that's just and so what we're telling you is we're not like, go vote for this person or go vote for that person. Of course, when we get closer to elections, we'll tell you our thoughts about politicians, and we'll tell you probably who we're going to vote for. And we're not shy about that. We have a particular set of politics, and we're not shy about that, right? But fundamentally,
it's about us coming together.
It's about us coming together
to get
organizing,
to
solidarity. As workers, as people. Like, I don't, I think you're wrong, right? If you go and vote for Trump or somebody, but like at the fundamental level, like, I don't care. It's much more important to me that we come together and we organize for each other, and so, like, if you want to work on the construction of the Mazda Toyota plant, get with the Iron Workers Local 477, or the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 558. Don't go work for some non-union contractor that'll just exploit you. They won't care about your safety. These unions, like David said, they have safety committees. You will have better wages. You'll have better benefits. Get with them. If you get a job for the plant, then once you get in, you need to organize. You need to organize, because they're not going to care about you. They're going to try to make the most amount of money off of your back that they can. And so what the good thing for you, what would be good for you and your brothers and sisters on the job, is to organize. So get with us. Yeah. We'll talk to you. We'll counsel you about, like, okay, what are the unions in our area? What's going to be the best fit for you? We'll tell you about the philosophy of all the different unions. You'll get to meet people from different unions. David and I, we've got a particular set of politics, and we've got a particular set of politics about unions as well, but like, I don't care who you organize with as long as you organize, because like, I care about you, like, as a person, as an individual, or as a group of people, and I want y'all to have better lives. And so, like, I don't care if you organize with my union or not. I just want you to organize.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we and the politics aside, it's the same way with me. I could care less whether you're Republican, conservative, liberal, libertarian. It don't matter to me.
Right.
I mean, at the end of the day, what we're looking for is people that'll come together and stick with us, get better wages, better benefits, better health care, safer working conditions. All these wonderful things is provided by collective bargaining as a group.
So again, if you want to work on the construction of that plant, get with the Iron Workers Local 477 or IBEW Local 558.
Yep. And if you're unsure how to get in touch with them, reach out to us on Facebook or anywhere that we're on social media.
Yeah, this has been the Valley Labor Report. Thanks for listening to us, folks. We will see you next week.
WVNN Athens, WVNN FM Trinity, a Cumulus station. It's 11 o'clock. News starts now.
Special report, coronavirus update. I'm Christopher Cruz.
I didn't really agree with the state reopening the beaches, but there's nothing you can do, really. There's too many people coming down here now. There's tons of people coming down to Tybee Island, so there's nothing they could really do about it, to be honest.
Georgia and other states from east to west, north to south are reopening businesses and beaches, although with some restrictions still in place. Will houses of worship in those few states that still require them to stay closed defy their governor's orders this weekend? Correspondent Nick Valencia reports on CDC guidelines released to help houses of worship reopen safely.
Things like modifying methods used to receive financial contributions, considering a stationary collection box, or electronic methods of collecting financial contributions. Other things include considering whether physical contact, for example, shaking hands, hugging, or kissing, can be limited among members of the faith community.
Yesterday, President Trump said the houses of worship provide essential services and must open or he would override the governors. I'm Christopher Cruz. More than 125 firefighters are now at San Francisco's Pier 45 trying to contain a massive fire, says correspondent Dan Simon.
Crew's still there. You do have fireboats in the water, and they do appear to have saved a historic World War II vessel that is there along the wharf. So they've done excellent work, and they're continuing to battle this blaze and keep it contained to that one warehouse. Still active, no injuries.
Hertz has been pushed into bankruptcy. Correspondent Allison